Welcome to First Bite, our midweek Detroit Lions podcast. We are back here just 3 weeks away from the NFL draft. My name is Jeremy Reisman. I am the editor-in-chief over at Pride of Detroit. You can find me at Detroit Online on Twitter. With me, as always, co-hosting First Bite is senior editor of Pride of Detroit, Ryan of Detroit. Pride of Detroit. Ryan Matthews is here at Ryan_POD. Ryan, how we doing?
I'm flattered that you would name the entire website after me. I really appreciate it. But speaking of big names, let's get to our very special guest.
Yes, As always on our First Bite, we like to bring in a guest, and he is now one of the four-man wrecking crew over at The Athletic, specifically talking about the draft, which now includes Dane Brugler, our friend Nick Baumgardner, Nate Tice, and this man who had a fantastic article that we're going to talk about this entire podcast. It's Diante Lee. Diante, how you doing, man?
Man, I'm glad to be here. I feel like I'm a broken record at this point because I've been saying all my thank yous and excited to be here and all that stuff, man. But, you know, I'm obviously very, very blessed, very lucky, very fortunate to be in this position. And beyond that, man, I'm happy to be sharing this platform with you guys, doing what I love to do most, which is talking about defensive guys, especially edge rushers.
Yes, that is the topic of the day because I don't know if it felt like your debut. Was it your debut article for them?
I guess you could. Yeah, this was definitely my print debut there. I had been on the Athletic NFL show a few times with Robert. I had done a couple episodes with Nate as well on there, but this is my first time as the Athletic employee properly putting anything out for the site.
Yeah, and it was a big one and one very much relevant to Detroit Lions fans' needs. You're basically breaking down Kayvon Thibodeaux versus Aiden Hutchinson versus Travon Walker, and I thought it was brilliantly done. So I wanna get right into it, and I think the guy I want to talk about first is actually the guy that you kind of concluded was your number one guy. Also, a guy that Dan Campbell just got done talking to me a ton about, which is Kayvon Thibodeaux. And one thing I liked about your article is that you kind of took the character concerns off the table, right off the board, because it's not something that we can easily judge from afar. But I want to it seems that conversation has bled into his tape a little bit in that, you know, there are plays that he quote unquote takes off, things like that. I kind of wanted your perspective on that. Is that something that you notice is a considerable problem, or was it more like people are looking for issues to find in his tape now?
Well, one of the reasons to answer your question, I'll kind of answer your question long-windedly. One of the reasons why I took the quote-unquote character concerns off the table when I was evaluating it is because if you step into somebody's tape with that preconceived notion, especially when it's like the reputation of, oh, does he play hard? You know, is he giving his best effort? Then anything that's not a dead sprint on the field, you can start to file into, you know, this guy has effort issues. Yeah. So I tried to look at it, you know, with this cleaner perspective as I could. And what I walked away with was not necessarily that he has effort issues or that he doesn't love the game. I do think that there are some plays where you can certainly look and see, like, okay, if we're talking about an NFL standard of getting to the football in pursuit, finishing plays, et cetera, there is definitely a higher level that I think that he can access. So to me, I think it's less about character issues and more about, and I think I kind of rounded out my analysis on him the same way, in terms of like untapped potential. To me, it's not so much that he has an issue with his love for the game or what he gives to it, as much as it is that you can watch him and very clearly see that there is an entire level or tier of play that he can access that he has not gotten to yet in his college career. And I think that that's maybe the thing that I lament the most about Thibodeaux at this point.
Yeah, and so you mentioned, you know, like right off the bat, if you can see how the players are ranked with Thibodeaux, Hutchinson, and Walker. And one thing that sticks out is that you have Thibodeaux having the highest ceiling of any of those players. Specifically talk about, you know, what Thibodeaux brings to the NFL as his calling card.
I mean, if you're talking about athletic prototypes, Thibodeaux fits that. That's the starting point that I go off of. And then when you're watching them, you know, for the reason why you would draft a pass rusher in the top 5 or top 3, whatever the case may be, what you're looking for is like can't miss types of potential, right? At that edge rusher type of position. And to be a can't miss prospect on the edge, you've got to be looking at top tier production as a pass rusher. I want to know that this guy can get to double digit sacks, you know, can at least reach that at least once, you know, while he's on his rookie deal, to show that, you know, he can maybe continue to push forward and maybe get into that all pro, if not defensive player of the year type of category at this position. And when I watch him play, that's what I see, not necessarily in the production, the sack numbers, though I do think that his pressure numbers are pretty good when he's healthy. And I do think that we have to contextualize the second half of the season as him kind of working his way through an ankle injury. Yeah. So that's something that I have to keep in mind as well. But when you watch like the way that he approaches being a pass rusher, I do think that he's honest when he says that he considers himself a cerebral player, and that's what you see on the field. You can see him trying to work these very intricate pass rush moves with his hands and his hips, and he's trying to work for very particular types of leverage and setting up one move to get to the next, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that what's actually going to help him is that when he gets to the league, I think that he'll be sitting in a defensive line room or outside linebackers room with the coach that's going to say, hey, man, we're glad that you want to be this great hand-fighting edge rusher, but you're a 4.5 runner in the 40. You've got a great first step. You've got great length. You've got good bend. You can change directions. How about you just start tearing off up the field, try to lower your pad level, and you play with the power and the speed that you have, and that'll be good enough. So I actually think that there will be a lot of addition by subtraction when he gets to the league, because I think that a proper edge coach, and one that I'm not sure if he had it at Oregon, will tell him like, hey, man, all you need is your fastball. Right. I always make analogies in football to other sports. And, if you can throw 95 miles an hour, I don't really care how good, how deep of a repertoire you have. I want to know that you can throw strikes with your 95-mile-an-hour pitch. And I think that once he really gets to focus in on that, we'll see him reach that ceiling. And that's why I have his potential number one when it comes to these three edge rushers that we're considering in this draft.
That's really interesting because, normally you think the opposite with a guy, like, especially at the college level, like, you see guys just winning with the same move over and over again because they can out physical. They're better athletes than most of the guys they're going against on Saturdays. Mm-hmm. When they get to the next league, they need to develop those kind of secondary moves. So you think in general, well, obviously a secondary move helps at the next level, but you think in general, like he can just succeed with that quick first step here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's his best move. And that's the thing that I kind of lamented most in watching him, was that like, I just don't feel like he accessed his best traits enough. And the game that I would say I would use as a reference point is when they played Cal this past year. When they played Berkeley, you can see in the second half, I don't know what happened between the first half and second half, but clearly somebody either got in his head or got in his ear, or he made a decision that he was just going to be a speed rusher. And you can see the way that things changed for him in that game as he went on. It was almost like a light bulb went off, which is like, oh, I can get my second foot in the ground before this guy can even get to the back of his pass set. I can win with speed every time. And then that started setting up all the secondary moves. So I'm not sure if he's maybe kind of overtrained himself in his time in college, trying to be a particular kind of edge rusher or trying to emulate somebody that he maybe, thinks very highly of at the next level. I'd be really interested if I ever had an opportunity to speak with him, if that's kind of his perspective. But when I watch certain games, Cal, UCLA, some of his best pass rushing games in 2021, the one thing that is in common, the common thread between all those games, is that he was using his speed and his first step as his initial move to set up everything else. And when he's honed in, locked in on those types of things, that's when you see the kind of potential, that kind of ceiling that makes me feel like he could go number one overall and certainly can end up being the best edge rusher out of this class.
So when you take stock of his game, Diante, and Thibodeaux has the explosive first step, he has the speed rush off the edge. When it comes to the next level in terms of his run defense, because it seems like the Lions, as they transition more from 3 down linemen to 4 down linemen, mm-hmm. Does Thibodeaux really fit there, or is that something that he would really have to work on at the next level?
I would say, he's not going to be a Jadeveon Clowney level of run defender, is what I would say on the edge. But I do think that if he can reach just like league average-esque, for an edge rusher, especially in a 4-down front, and for what I believe the Lions are going to be trying to do with this defense, I think that they're going to do something that's going to be a lot closer to what like Dennis Allen did with the Saints, right? Which is like the 4-down stuff. Yep. You're playing a lot of 2 high shells. You'll spin down and play cover 3 when it's needed. But you're using these edge rushers truly to set the edge and allow your linebackers to play slower, flow to the ball, et cetera, et cetera. I do think that he can do that job. There's definitely some room for improvement, but it's all like small intricacies. It's not that he's a minus, and I wouldn't say he's a net zero. I just don't think that he's the run defender that Aiden Hutchinson and Travon Walker are. But if we're using a guy like Travon Walker as a point of reference, almost everybody is going to look like an unfair example, against most guys in the draft over years, not just in 2022. So I would say that it's adequate, maybe not elite, but he can certainly be an adequate run defender at the next level.
Well, let's talk about some of those other guys, and let's start with Aiden Hutchinson, the presumed number 1 pick. And I guess my quick question to you is, why is he the presumed number 1 pick?
If you would have asked me this a few months ago, I would have said that playing in being the best player in the Big Ten certainly helps, you know, from a narrative perspective. And that definitely is, you know, one of the ingredients in the recipe. But if you want to just talk about his bona fides this past year, well, he's a multi-year starter at a top tier, you know, Power 5 school, one that I think everybody has a lot of respect for. He's played for great defensive coordinators in Don Brown and Mike McDonald last year. And then finally, I think when he made the position change, you see the explosion in production, right? And when you see that, immediately your first thought is like, okay, this guy has unlocked something. And I think that if you talk about like your floor, what level you're going to be at when you walk into the league, you're going to get a guy who's a great run defender, in my opinion, and a guy who knows who he is as a pass rusher right now in a way that, in comparison, I would say that Thibodeaux has not yet learned of himself. So when you talk, you know, when you talk in terms of like, what is this guy going to be right now? The day that we put him in our uniform, I can understand why he would be the number 1 overall pick. He's got really good hands. I think that he does extremely well with his pad level for a guy who measured in at 6'7", which was much taller than I thought that he was going into the combine. And then you look at some of his athletic testing, like running a sub-7 3-cone at that height and that weight is extremely impressive. You know, the arm length thing, that is kind of, you can make of that what you will based on how you feel about the player in your evaluation. But to be sub 165 in the 10-yard split, to run sub 7 seconds in the 3-cone, to have a better than 35-inch vertical, you know, and then to put up the production that you see, there's no reason for anybody to act like he couldn't be in consideration for number 1, even if he's not my pick. I can 100% look at him and see he's got all the ingredients of what you would look for in an NFL level pass rusher, and somebody who can still, I think, maybe be a little bit better, even if he doesn't have the ceiling of a Thibodeaux or a Walker.
And so part of that discussion too, right, is that he might be the safest pick for Detroit, right? If he ends up not going 1, that the Lions can get a guy who's built in, who can put his hand in the dirt, who can set the edge, who can play that traditional 4-3 defensive end spot. But I guess my question is, there's this narrative that kind of exists about him that he's this max effort guy. Like he's a guy who doesn't really have the athletic qualities when, you know, you just went over all these incredible athletic traits he has. So like, just how high do you think his ceiling is? Because that's the perception that, you know, high floor guy because he's a max effort dude, but maybe the ceiling isn't quite there.
I would say that I think the comp I made when I wrote it out was Max Crosby, right? And that's a guy who's basically kind of been between 8 and 12 sacks, you know, throughout his career as a young player. And I think that if you get that kind of return out of a guy like Aiden Hutchinson, you have no reason to complain at any point, right? And I think that when you add that on top of who he is as a run defender, which I think, you know, short of Walker, I think that you can make the argument that he's the best run defender on the edge in this draft class outside of Travon Walker. I think that's, you know, that makes plenty of reason to draft a guy in that number 1 or number 2 spot. So that's kind of the approach that I'm going with him. When we talk about ceiling and being a max effort guy, that certainly exists in his tape, right? You 100% get high levels of energy, high levels of effort. You can definitely tell that the defense kind of went as Aiden Hutchinson dictated that it went. You know, so I do think that all of the leadership and intangibles that people have discussed with him is certainly valid. But I don't think that that's an accurate description of his game as a whole. When you watch him as a pass rusher, like I said, he knows who he is in terms of how he uses his hands, right? For a guy who has short arms relative to his height, it has not really been a hindrance for him in terms of turning the corner, in terms of keeping distance when he needs to, making contact with guys. I do think that he may run into trouble with your elite tackles, guys who do have that high level of length and athleticism, you know, being able to lock him in. I do think that if he goes down the middle of tackles or does not have a secondary move prepared, he can 100% get locked in. But does that make him any different than any other pass rusher? We see TJ Watt gets hung up on that too. You know, Nick Bosa can get hung up on that too. So I don't want to use that as a reason to disqualify him from being the best prospect in this class. I would say that, you know, as a technician, I think that he's just as good as anybody in this class. I would say that in run defense, you know, reiterating that, he's certainly right near the top of this class. And on effort, on leadership, and on those intangibles, you know, you're going to get a guy who steps in the door that's ready to be an adult, ready to produce the way that you need him to. You're not going to have any trouble with motivating him to be, you know, the best player that he needs to be. So I can 100% see, you know, if you're looking for, hey man, we just want a guy that we can close our eyes and not have to think about what he's going to be on the edge, I would never protest somebody going out to get Hutchinson for those reasons.
In that sense, then what is the thing that's kind of limiting his ceiling? I know you rank the guys based on potential, and you said maybe the other 2 guys have more potential. What is I guess the thing that maybe limits the kind of person that Aiden Hutchinson can become?
I think that, and this is like a very kind of technical in the weeds type of thing. It's just that when I look at guys who run like a sub 7 second 3 cone, we typically associate that with guys who are like great benders around the edge. You think of Myles Garrett, you think of Von Miller, et cetera, et cetera. I just don't see that in his game. Now, that's, it's not an insult. The guy is 6'7" and 260 pounds, man. Like, it's hard to bend at that size. He's a power forward playing defensive end, for crying out loud. So you want to be fair to that. Yeah. And I do think that he's got great change of direction ability. Like, that's what I think that his athletic scores reflect, is that his agility, his ability to use, varying pad levels in his hands. I think that all of that's reflected in his athletic scores. It's just like when you think about guys at the top of this sport in terms of rushing off the edge, that ability to bend and get around tackles, it does kind of require a certain level of, size and arm length that I don't think that he has access to. And for that reason, I think that his production will live in that kind of 7 to 11 sack range, but you may not get the 15, 16, 17 sack season unless, he has one of these ridiculous types of, once in a lifetime breakouts. I don't see that on the horizon for him.
All right, great stuff, Diante. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Travon Walker and maybe some of the other guys in this edge class. So stick with us here on First Bite. We'll be right back. All right, quick note to our live audience. We are going to just go straight into the second segment, and then Diante, we'll send him on his way. We only got him for a half hour here. We don't want to overspend his time here, but we'll talk to you guys after the show. So just give us a minute to get right back into it, and we'll do it. And we are back here on First Bite. We're with Diante Lee from The Athletic, part of their awesome draft team over there. We talked about Aiden Hutchinson. We talked about Kayvon Thibodeaux. Let's talk about the third guy in this trio of edges at the top of the draft, Travon Walker. Obviously, I think maybe he's one of the most polarizing guys in this class just because he has the crazy athletic traits, but not necessarily the production or the experience at the edge. So I guess my question to you is, in his career in Georgia, he certainly got more opportunities on the edge as his career went on. So did you see development during that time? Did you see him get better as an edge, or was it just kind of like still new to it's? Did he still look like he was new to the position, I guess, by the end of last season?
I guess the answer to me, and I hate using these because they sound like such elaborate dodges, but the truth is in both. Like the answer is yes to both. Did he make growth as an edge rusher? I would certainly say yes, especially in 2021. But if you're really watching him and not only evaluating him individually, but in relation to the other edges in this class, he does still look like maybe the newest to the spot, that we see. And, this is just kind of a general takeaway and really not even particular to Travon Walker, but, the draft season and the off season in general will put you in positions where you have to use cooling language on guys that you actually really like because the conversations on them, I think, kind of get out of hand a bit. And that's exactly where I'm at with Walker, which is like, I really have to be measured in how I analyze them because I don't want to sound like the biggest wet blanket in the world, but I also want to get across the fact that I personally don't really see what everybody else in the league or around the league media that has access to these GMs, scouts, et cetera, what they see. And that's kind of where I'm at. I do think that he's an intriguing prospect. I just you could have not have convinced me at any point prior to him running that 4.51 at the combine that anybody would be considering him, in the top 5, let alone people saying that he should be drafted ahead of Kayvon Thibodeaux and maybe contending for number 1 overall prior to, I think, what everybody assumes to, be Jacksonville picking Aiden Hutchinson.
Right. And so part of that too, Diante, like we can't ignore the idea that, I think a lot of people are getting enamored with the fact of his versatility, right?
Right.
You talk about it in your article at great length, from a 3-tech to a 9-tech, Travon Walker's lining up all over the place. Do you see, and I specifically think you mentioned too, on third downs, he might kick inside and pick on guards and centers in an ideal situation, maybe. But do you see maybe that versatility being something that's keeping him from entering the conversation with the 1s and 2s because he isn't that elite edge rusher?
Well, I think that it kind of comes down to that conversation of being a jack of all trades, meaning that you're kind of a master of none.
And I think right? Yep.
Yeah, and that's where I think that he's kind of at right now. And again, it makes it sound pejorative even though it's not, because I think that he's an excellent prospect, right? Like, it's just that when I'm watching him, you know, relative to these other two guys in Thibodeaux and Hutchinson, as a pass rusher particularly, it's just not close, in my opinion. It's just not close. It doesn't mean that he can never get there, but I can't sit and watch this film and pretend as though what he's doing in terms of pass rush moves, which is a lot of just like pocket crushing or trying to get late pressure, cleanup pressures. And there's a lot of that's kind of baked into Georgia's defense because they ran a lot of stunts, obviously between Channing Tindall, Quay Walker, and Nakobe Dean, who might all be, you know, might be 1, 2, and 3 in terms of the 3 best linebackers in this class, right? I don't want to hold it against them that Georgia's defense was best served to use those guys as blitzers and trying to use the defensive line to kind of open up space for those guys. So I don't want to hold that against them too much. But if I have to evaluate what I'm seeing, I don't see a guy right now that's prepared to be an NFL level pass rusher, especially not out on the edge.
You kind of stepped on my next question, but I'll kind of ask it anyways. But obviously, a lot of the counter arguments that we're hearing in favor of Travon Walker is Georgia. It wasn't his assignment to pass rush as aggressively as it was. Is that something that you buy into, or are you kind of just looking at the opportunities where it's clear that he is the pass rusher in these reps and he's just not getting it done as consistently as the other guys?
I do think schematically it's fair to say that none of their defensive linemen were really tasked with being dominant pass rushers or asked to do that. I do think that that's a very fair assessment. The only issue I have with that is, okay, so again, this just comes back to all we can evaluate is what we see. Yeah. We can make whatever projections we want off of that. But if you were to profile a guy to me who's 6'5", 270 pounds, runs a 4.5, but is really only been kind of average in terms of like his pressure rate, his pass rush win rate, you know, if you follow those kind of stats from Pro Football Focus and things like that, if I were to show you that kind of player and then I tell you in description that, well, if you draft this guy, he's probably somebody you can play on the edge on first and second down, but if you really want to get great value out of him, you got to kick him inside on third down. I don't think anybody would turn around and say that that's a guy you want to draft in the top 5. Now, does that mean that he's not valuable? No, but there are a lot of guys in the NFL who play the edge rusher position whose best value is turning him into a 3 technique or using these exotic fronts to try to manufacture pressure. You shouldn't have to manufacture pressure for an edge rusher that you're considering picking in the top 5, top 3, top 10, really top half of the first round, right? You want guys, again, that you can turn your back on and say, he's going to get after the quarterback one way or another. He has a method to his pass rush that will allow him to access, you know, those high pressure rates that you need to see at a valuable position like that. I just can't imagine spending a 5-year contract and a high-level draft pick on a guy that you can't guarantee can at least be at a league average level in terms of pass rush and pressures and things like that.
So, I mean, the Lions, though, I think, Diante, they're really confident in their coaching staff, right? Like, they believe that they have the right group of guys there that they can coach up guys. I mean, they're bringing back players, right? They're bringing back Charles Harris after he has a breakout season. They're bringing back Tracy Walker after he's shown, you know, some real flashes of high-level productivity. How far off do you think Walker is from a technical standpoint of maybe developing into that edge rusher? Or do you think that maybe, you know, those elite numbers that you would associate with, you know, the guys that you spoke about before, you know, 15, 16, 17 sacks, like, do you think maybe that might just not be in the cards for Travon Walker?
Where I stand right now, I can't assume, I'm not comfortable projecting out that he can access that high elite all pro level of pass rush production. I just don't see enough in what he does to say that. I do think ultimately success for me in terms of him as an edge defender is going to be, hey, this might be a guy that could legitimately turn out to be the best run defender in the NFL by the end of his rookie contract. That's how highly I think of him as a run defender. And then from there, it's like, can you get him to 7 sacks, 7.5 sacks, 8 sacks, maybe 9 sacks if you're really having a good year? Again, does that sound like a top
5 pick? Yeah. No, I hear you.
Maybe, maybe. Again, it depends on how willing you are to stretch your own logic out on what you believe a pass rusher's value to be or an edge defender's value to be in general. The one thing that I will say, and this kind of lends to his value, in my opinion, especially for a team like Detroit, because he's so versatile, you can put him anywhere. That does open up the door for you to do so much within your defense. And I don't want to act like that does not matter. because I do think that his comfort in playing a three technique, not only playing a three technique, but being 270 pounds, which tells me he can do it at the NFL level if you need him to. Having that 4.5, sub 1.65, 10-yard split, sub 7-second 3-cone, you can see the silhouette of just like this amazing edge rusher. Please don't get me wrong in my analysis of him. It's just like, I can only go off of the skills that you show on tape, not just what you do at the combine. And the skills that he shows on tape shows that maybe he can be one of those pocket crusher, high effort, high energy, like all the things that we say about Hutchinson as a player, I think might apply a little bit more aptly to Walker as an edge rusher in terms of being like a max effort, high energy type of guy. And again, if that was all that Aiden Hutchinson was, I wouldn't consider him a top 5 pick, which is why I don't really consider Walker in that discussion either. I don't think that means that he's not a first round draft pick. I just don't see him, in the same kind of class that we hold Hutchinson and Thibodeaux. I think he's much closer to your Nick Benitos, your David Ojabos, et cetera, those guys who are in that second tier who maybe turn out to be good pass rushers, but maybe bring something a little bit different to the table. And maybe you hope that you can develop what they lack later on in their career.
That's dovetails a softball, Jeremy, perfectly into what I was going to ask, and it'll be our last question for you. Is the Lions are in a position where they might not even take an edge. They might decide to go safety with Kyle Hamilton. Maybe they go wild and get a quarterback. But edge is still a big need. So how much of a drop off is there between that second tier? Like Jermaine Johnson is a guy who's starting to get top 10 hype. Obviously that would be more probably an opportunity if the Lions trade back. So I guess if the Lions pass on edge, how much are they really giving up if they go for that second tier, either at the bottom of the first round or if there's a trade scenario sometime there in the first?
To me, if they decide to trade back or do something else with their pick, I think if you were to leave the draft with maybe a George Karlaftis or a Jermaine Johnson, that's reason to be happy. I do think that maybe when you start getting to like the Boye Mafe, Evakedi, who I think is a good player, but I don't know if he'll be a top tier pass rusher. You talk about like guys like that would be like, hey man, if we end up getting guys like that in the second, third round, they can fill a spot if you have a hole at a position, but you're not going to get top tier production from them. I don't believe. I think Karlaftis is a steal guy. If you have one on your board where it's like, hey, if we trade back and this guy is available, in the mid first round, the late first round-ish area, or he seems like he's sliding past where we have him projected, that's a guy you can draft if you don't get, a Thibodeaux or a Hutchinson and feel like it's still a win in terms of addressing the edge rusher position.
That's Diante Lee. You can follow him at Diante Lee FB on Twitter. Anything else you want to plug? There's always an athletic deal going on. Do you have one of those in your back pocket right now?
They have. And I think I'm a little too new for them to have shared all the little, promo codes and deals with yet. But I will say, certainly check us out at The Athletic. I'll kind of plug all the guys who are part of the team. Nick Baumgartner, who I have a high level of respect for in his analysis. Dan Brugler, who everybody in football, especially around the draft, should be familiar with, does some of the best work that we have out here. Yes. To say the beasts are coming soon. So definitely, tune in, be tuned into The Athletic for that. Obviously you have, me and Nate Tice. I think that Nate is going to do some excellent work with offensive guys and on the draft overall. I do the same thing on the defensive end and approaching the draft, from an overall perspective through that lens. So there's a lot to look for. We're also going to be, doing a little bit more than just what's in the NFL draft. So please keep your eyes peeled and see kind of how this thing grows. A lot of the conversations we're having right now is, what more can we do beyond just talking about the draft, and some of the things that I've heard thrown around, I think is going to open up the door for some great analysis of this sport that we all love. And I'm looking forward to being a part of it. So please keep your eyes open for that. And like they said, follow me on Twitter, Diante Lee FB.
Perfect, man. Thank you for some great insight on this the conundrum the Lions are facing, and yeah, I'm going to be following you and all the Athletics' awesome content throughout draft year, throughout the regular year, and I really do appreciate your 30 minutes here with us.
Oh man, no problem. Thank you guys. You guys have a good one.
All right, you too.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you all for watching. We'll be back with the main podcast on Monday night, and we will see you soon. Thanks for watching. It's Chaos. Be kind.